Welcome to this special edition of Go Vote Omaha. This is a candidate forum for the Douglas County Register of Deeds County Assessor and for the Republican primary in the May 15th election, presented by the League of Women Voters of Greater Omaha. I'm Jerry Simon, a League member and moderator for the forum. The League never supports or opposes political parties or candidates. We present this forum solely for voter education. Here's the format for our forum. Each candidate will have a 1-minute opening statement. We'll follow that with questions prepared by the League of Women Voters, for which they'll each have up to 90 seconds to answer. And we'll close the forum with a 1-minute closing statement by each candidate. A timekeeper will alert the candidates when they have 30 seconds of time remaining to speak and when to stop. Before the forum, the candidates drew lots to determine the initial speaking order, which we'll alternate throughout the forum. And I'll introduce them now to you in that order. There are 2 Republican candidates running for the Douglas County Assessor Register of Deeds office. They are Kris Pierce and Walt Peffer. And we'll start with our opening statements, beginning with Kris Pierce.
Well, I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate, and also I'd like to thank you for your time, for taking time out to learn about your candidates and what our issues are and what we plan to do for the office. My 2 years as the Deputy Assessor gave me great insight to the relationship between property owners and the office. Unfortunately, for decades, that relationship has been a pretty adversarial one. Now, what we want to do is, with my management style and plan, is to change that relationship from an adversarial to an advocate, and with my plan to regain control over the values to make sure that they're fair for taxpayers. Now, I've seen this office become an arm for government, rather than its true nature, which is being a servant to the people. What makes me a good candidate is my ability to look outside the box and use all the tools available to me to get the job done. My goals are to get values right, to communicate often with taxpayers, and also to ensure unadulterated fairness. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Walt Peffer.
I go by the creed of God, country, family. My Christian faith is important to me. I attend Christ Community Church with my wife, Susan. I love this country. I served in the Armed Forces of the United States, and I'm a Vietnam veteran. I love this state, this city, and this county. I had the privilege of serving on the staff of 4 Omaha mayors and putting together very complicated budgets. I had the privilege of also working with our legislature. I've been in commercial real estate for over 20 years. A longtime resident of the city of Omaha for over 45 years, and I'm a longtime Republican. My wife's name is Susan. We have 3 children and 7 grandchildren.
Thank you. Now here's our first question for the candidates. The offices of County Assessor and Register of Deeds were combined into one 4 years ago. If elected, what would be your priorities for the Register of Deeds, and what would be the priorities for the Assessor? And we'll start with Walt.
Well, my priority for the Assessor's Office is to be more open, transparent, and communicative with the taxpayers and with the County Board. As far as the Register of Deeds, I think that office is functioning very well, and it has for some time. But again, back to the Assessor's Office, I think we need to work on getting the assessments accurate, fair, and equalized. I would also work with the staff to boost their morale, because over the last 4 years that office has been in turmoil and it's been an absolute disaster.
Thank you. Kris?
I'd have to agree with Walt that the Register of Deeds office does run very well, but one of the things that I want to look at is something that Sarpy County did, which is it no longer charges for document searches for deeds. I know our county, Douglas County, does charge title companies a fee for that, but what little is known is that the Register of Deeds now has a technology fee. It's additional income used for technology upgrades, and I want to offset that fee that we get already for the fee that we're going to start charging title companies and individuals. Now the Assessor's Office, that's another gambit. What I want to do, though, is 3 things. I want to be transparent, simplicity, and consistency. What I mean by that is we need to make sure all the information that the assessor has for your home is available to you. Currently, you don't know the market value of your home, which is the beginning number of the taxation process. Simplicity is basically what I want to do is install a flat assessment rate. which every home will be assessed at 93%. So if you know your market value, we multiply that by 0.93, you will always know what your assessed value will be. And finally, consistency. Once we get control over the assessments and the values, the up and down roller coaster that we've had for about 3 or 4 years will end. It'll be very stable, and there'll be very small changes in value. And that is what really homeowners need, is consistency when it comes to their tax burden, their property taxes.
Thank you. Here's our next question. The state of Nebraska does require properties to be valued between 92 and 100% of market value. What percentage or target would you set for Douglas County and why? And what is the importance of that figure? And we'll start with Kris.
Well, as I mentioned, my goal is all properties, all residential properties will be assessed at 93%. According to Ruth Sorensen, in a letter that she sent a few years ago to the county board, the assessor has the authority to value anywhere in that range. So I've decided to do the range at 93. Why? Well, first of all, it's a flat, and it will make sure everyone is treated fairly. Whether your home is worth $1 million or $100,000, you're being assessed at the same rate. The second reason is, I believe, for a tax burden reason. I believe that if you're going to be taxed on your property, it should be at the lower end that I'm able to give that to you. There are homes now that are assessed above 100%. There are homes now that are assessed below 90%. That's a fact that we have to live with now. So no one's been treated fairly. With our flat assessment rate, not only will people be treated fairly, but you'll be assessed at the lowest end possible. So hopefully it will bring down some of your tax burden.
Thank you. Walt?
You know, I as well would love to go to the lowest possible rate, but what's happened in the past is that the assessor's office over the last 4 years, and in an email or a memo from Diane to the county board, she indicated that the problem she ran into was that they were at 88% in some cases, which is below what the state statute is. I think the primary thing we need to do is first get the assessments accurate. Then they need to be fair and they need to be equalized. And if it's 92% or 93% and it meets the goals of the assessor's office, that's great. But you also want to make sure that you're in compliance with what the state wants to do, because in the case of the assessor's office, the state came in and noticed that they were not at fair market value. They came in and mandated an across-the-board increase, and that's what caused the big bump a few years ago. I think that the taxpayer should be able to know what a fair market value of that house is. It needs to be set accurately. That's the biggest point. As far as the 92, 93, 94, that'll come.
Thank you. Here's our next question, which will go to Walt first. What formula would you use to determine property valuations in Douglas County? Why? And does it differ from what's currently being done? And we'll start with Walt.
Well, what formula? Well, first I would use arm's length transactions as far as setting fair market value in houses. When it comes to commercial side, you know, I've been in that business for 20 years. I've had to set what a fair market value is, and that is what the market will bear. And I've done that over 20 years. I understand how to do that. The biggest thing, though, I think, is you just have to be accurate. The formula has to be just being accurate as to what the fair market value is and an arm's length transaction.
Thank you. Kris?
Well, the way the assessment process works in the county, it's called mass appraisal, which is different than what many people understand as a fee appraisal, where you are buying or selling a home and you get an appraisal done of the home. A mass appraisal, you have to consider all homes within the county and equalize them, as Walt had mentioned. That is that's the national standard by which we have to do that. But what the interesting thing is then we have an opportunity to talk to property owners individually. One of the things I'm going to be doing is what I call my Assessment Advisory Commission, made up of real estate professionals, because they do market analysis and they understand the market better than anybody. So with their help, we're going to be able, on an individual basis, when we are able to talk to property owners, get their market value. Now, when it comes to commercial property, I'm of the opinion that they should be valued based on income. If a commercial property is very successful, their income is greater, they should be valued at that. But if they have a strip mall that has very high vacancy rate, they're not able to fill it, they shouldn't be valued at a high rate because they're really not producing. The value of commercial property is the income value it produces, and that's how it should be valued.
Thank you. Here's our next question. Should the same property valuation formula be used across counties? Specifically, should Douglas and Sarpy counties use the same formula? Why or why not? And we'll start with Kris.
Well, that's a good question. It's a bit of a tricky question. As I mentioned, mass appraisal is what all counties should be using on an initial basis. But as we all know, appraisal, the reason why the state allows a 92 to 100% range is because appraisal is a subjective science. It's all based on who's looking at that property at a particular time. But what's key there is you need to train the county staff, no matter what county you're in, the proper way to appraise property. What is a good condition? What is an excellent condition? And you have to have a set standard by which all appraisers will meet. So you may have some appraisers. Now the interesting thing is where you share jurisdictions between counties. Douglas and Sarpy County have that issue now, where the same jurisdiction taxes across county lines, but on the Douglas County side, the property's worth X, and on Sarpy, it's Y. And in many cases, Sarpy County property owners pay a higher tax rate. That's something that I've talked to many county board members in Sarpy County, trying to find a solution that's not going to be an easy solution, but that is pretty much, I think, statewide, the next issue for assessments.
Thank you. Walt?
If I understand your question correctly, I think that both Douglas and Sarpy County are governed by state statute. And so they both have to abide by that. But I think as far as the mass appraisals, they may do it differently than we do it here. I know that the mass appraisal here, we need to increase the number of mass appraisal areas. From its current to maybe 15, 20. We also need to make sure on our side that that the appraisals, we're not comparing apples and oranges. For instance, you can't compare Florence to Ponca Hills. I mean, it's a whole different thing. You can't compare Westwood to other areas of town. So in some cases, we're going to have to pick and choose and blend those to come up with what is a fair market value for those properties that is fair and accurate. But they're both governed by the same statutes. I think the only difference is right now, I think Sarpy's at 96% of value, and Omaha is somewhere in the 92 or 93, in some cases down to 88. So, but they're all governed by the same statutes.
Thank you. Here's our next question. Some counties, like Sarpy, do yearly assessments of valuation. Douglas County has done assessments less frequently. If elected, would you direct that valuation assessment be done yearly or less often, and why? And we'll begin with Walt.
Well, there's a couple things to look at here. First of all, I think that there's a statute that requires the county assessor's office to visit each property once every 6 years. Like to see that changed down in the legislature with the advent of drones and satellites and building permits and stuff. I think that would be a benefit. I would continue to do it on a yearly basis so that we can stay on top of it, and then those people that feel their property values are set too high presently can at least come in and ask to have that looked at. Yeah, I'd stay on the annual basis.
Thank you. Kris?
Well, I think it goes back to what the market's doing. We have a proposal that we are going to make neighborhoods market areas. So like Walt mentioned, there's about 17 different markets that cover the entire county. What we're going to do is make neighborhoods like Westridge or Sunset Hills or Huntington Park their own market areas. So if there is no activity in the market for a particular market area, there is no need to reassess. You should be reassessing with like buildings, like construction, which are your neighborhoods. So I don't know if I would do an every year. You're talking 210,000 parcels with about 21 appraisers. I can tell you now the math doesn't add up. We're not able to fulfill, unfortunately, the statutory requirement of 6 years to inspect every property. Now, inspection and assessment are two different things. But as far as assessment goes, I think we need to go with whatever's driving the market. If there is no activity in the market, there's no need to reassess that particular area in that given year. But if there is activity, let's say in the Dundee area, then that'll be an area that we should reassess because there's enough activity in the market to justify an upgrade in value of the entire market.
Thank you. Our next question. How does the Douglas County Assessor and Register of Deeds Office relate to the Douglas County Commission? If elected, how would you work with commissioners? Kris.
It's interesting, and it's been an interesting dynamic over the years, but I think it's a partnership because the assessor's job is to create the number by which all entities, including the Douglas County Board, tax on. So there has to be a cooperation, but there has to be independence. The county board actually is the entity that sets all values for the county. The assessor makes recommendations based off work throughout the year. So there has to be a lot more communication throughout the year between both the assessor and as the deeds when it comes to what the market's doing, how many titles are being filed, and with the county board so that they have a better idea when it comes budget time, when it comes levy rate time, they know what's going on. I think minimum of a monthly or quarterly meeting just about the market is important for that. The other thing is I think we need to work with the county board to see some cost-saving measures that can be had. And there was a lot of talk that when we merge these two offices, there's going to be a great amount of savings. Well, I can tell you now, working in that office, there is no savings other than an elected official and a chief deputy. But I think there are some ways, and I think some county board members have some ideas that have some validity. So there has to be a partnership, but yet there has to be some independence between those two.
Thank you. Walt.
Well, it's apparent that the assessor's office has a problem with communications with the county board. The assessor has to work with the county board on setting their budget. They work with the county board and the Board of Equalization on protested values. But I think the assessor's office should also spend time talking to and working with the various school districts, giving them an idea of what's going on in the market so that they can have some idea of what's going on so they can plan their budgets. The same with talking to the NRD and all the other elected offices that actually set the mill levy. But I think talking to the county board, working with them because they do set your budget, and giving them an idea of what you want to do, being more of an advocate for the office, but at the same time doing it in a professional manner instead of an adversarial manner with the county board, I think would be beneficial.
Thank you. Our next question. Would you make any changes to how property owners get information about their property valuation and how they can contest property valuations? And we'll start with Walt.
Well, I think what we do is the way that it's delivered, the assessment dates are set by statute. But I think the thing that we would like to do is instead of everyone receiving their preliminary valuations and having a great deal of concern about them and having to worry about the final coming out and then going down and protesting, we would like to hold town hall meetings across the county. Numerous town hall meetings and meet with the taxpayers to answer their questions in advance as to what may or may not have happened. That way they don't have to come downtown to try and get their answers. After all, we work for them. And they wouldn't have to take off of work to come downtown to get the preliminary questions answered. So we would, I think the statute requires that they come out on a certain date. They're delivered on a certain date, and then we would schedule town hall meetings, visit with them, and see if we can answer any questions they may have, and hopefully save them a lot of time and trouble because, again, we work for them.
Thank you. Kris.
More communication is better. What forms of communication is something we can work on, whether it be electronic, town hall meetings. The other thing we have to consider is cost. There was additional cost when the current assessor decided to send out assessment notices to everyone, including those that had no change at all. So that created some confusion even with those. But one of the things that we're working on is, and we've had some conversations, is creating a computer model that'll be available on our website where a homeowner can go onto that computer model and enter all the attributes and dynamics of their property. And there is a standard by which all those things have value. And this software will then create a value based on the information they provide, and they'll be able to look at what they came up with and what the assessor came up with. That can either, one of the good things is if that number is close, they'll feel confident that the assessor's doing their job. If it's not, then what that's going to do is automatically create a conversation between that property owner and the assessor's office, so that we can find out, all right, is our information wrong, or there are things that we have that they didn't, or vice versa, such as, you have me down for a finished basement, I don't even have a basement. That's a critical one that creates a lot of havoc. So that's one of the things that we're going to work on, as well as constant communication on a quarterly basis, especially about what's going on with the market, because the market is what dictates how values go up or down.
Thank you. Here's our next question, and we'll begin with Kris on this one. If a property owner successfully contests their valuation, how long should that valuation remain in effect?
Well, I can tell you exactly what my policy will be. If someone goes to the Board of Equalization and wins their protest, so the Board of Equalization makes a change, that value will be valid for 2 years, so there will not be a value change for 2 years. If they're unsuccessful and then they go on to TERC, which is the Tax Equalization Review Commission, basically that's the state level appellate process, and they win that protest, that value will be frozen for 3 years. The reason why we want to do this is because so many times I've talked to property owners how I won my protest, but then the assessor just put it right back up or back down to where it was before I protested. There shouldn't be that much value change from year to year. It just doesn't make sense. I think a lot of it in past assessor was an ego issue, where I'm going to prove that I'm right. And the way I look at things is, if the county board who sets values decides to overrule my recommendation, that is the value that we're going to set for 2 years. And again, for TERC, they are 2 levels above my recommendation. If they make a determination, then that property owner should be able to avail themselves of that value for the next 3 years.
Thank you. Walt?
Well, if you haven't guessed, I'm not one that spends a lot of time and spends a lot of words trying to explain something. I'll just simply say Kris and I are on the same page on that. So, next question.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do you propose any changes for the Register of Deeds office? We'll start with Walt.
I do not. I think that the Register of Deeds office does an outstanding job. I think the only thing that we can look at that may be a benefit, again, is electronics and making it simpler for the title companies and the taxpayers and everyone to get the information they need. That's it.
Thank you. Kris?
I agree with Walt. I think there'll be very little, but one of the things, as I mentioned earlier, is I'd like to go to the Sarpy County model, which is they no longer charge title companies and individuals for document searches. With this new tech fee income stream that's separate, that the Register of Deeds gets, will help offset, because that's really the reason we charge fees for titles, is so that we can maintain the software component of that new online searching apparatus. The only other thing I would change in that office is I would try to physically combine the deeds with the assessors. That office is now 4 floors apart. If we could combine those 2 offices physically, there is some staff savings right there. There's administrative and other things that we could, through attrition and through retirement, actually slim that office down great big if we were physically. And that's going to take a commitment on the county board's part for budget and for the building commission to try to make that happen.
Okay. We're going to go to our closing statements now, and we will start with Kris Pierce.
Oh, I get to start again. All right. Basically, what I'd like to end with is property values are not a black and white, because there's a human face, there's a family behind each number. For far too long, the numbers have been just thrown out arbitrarily without any understanding of the repercussions on taxpayers. You know, we just had a manager increase values by 800%, and failed to recognize the impact on those taxpayers that their taxes could then also be impacted by 300, or 800%. You know, we don't need lifelong politicians or people that are supported in order to get this machine working. That's how we got here in the first place. Now, if we expect change, real change, we can't keep putting the same leadership and the same political thought into this very important role. I'm the taxpayer advocate this county needs. I'm also the person that can get the job starting on day one starting January of 2019 to start change. Thank you.
Thank you. Walt Peffer.
Well, let's be clear. I'm a longtime resident of the city of Omaha, 45 years. I've been a long-time Republican. I've worked on the staff of 4 Omaha mayors and put together very complicated budgets. I've worked 20 years in commercial real estate, so I know real estate inside and out. I've also been endorsed in this race by former Governor Dave Heidemann, former Congressman Lee Terry, all the Republican members of the Omaha City Council, all the Republican members of the Douglas County Board, by numerous former and present state senators, by Merrick Roser of Ralston, by Mike Kennedy on the Millard School Board, by Linda Richards on the Ralston School Board. I've worked with all these folks. They know I'm capable of doing this job and doing it well, and that's what I will do. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters again for putting this on for us. I would ask everybody to pray for our country, and I would ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes our forum for the Republican candidates running in the May 15th primary for the Douglas County Assessor Register of Deeds office. One of these 2 candidates will advance to the general election in the fall and will face the Democratic candidate at that time. The League would like you to know that we are doing other forums as well. We will be recording many for legislative districts, for the Omaha School Board. We will be doing some of the State Board of Education, and those will all be shown on KPAO, Cox Channel 22, or CenturyLink Channel 89, and they'll also be then on our YouTube channel, Go Vote Omaha. For the League of Women Voters, I'm Jerry Simon, reminding you to inform yourself about the issues and the candidates, and on May 15th for the primary election, Go Vote Omaha.